Far beyond the edges of busy cities, where the ocean stretched like silver silk beneath the moon, stood an old lighthouse upon a lonely cliff. The people in the nearby fishing village called it Star Watch Lighthouse because on clear nights, its glowing lantern seemed to touch the stars themselves. And inside that lighthouse lived a gentle old keeper named Elias. Elias had soft white hair, kind eyes, and hands roughened by years of tending the great lantern flame. Every evening, just before sunset painted the sea gold and orange, he climbed the winding stairs, carrying his little brass oil can. Step by step, slowly, carefully, always humming the same peaceful tune. The villagers trusted Elias more than anyone else in the world. Sailors crossing the dark sea often said the lighthouse beam felt like a friend, guiding them safely home. But there was one thing almost nobody knew. Long ago, Elias had made a promise, a very special promise. And every night, for many years, he kept it faithfully. Even when storms roared, even when thunder shook the cliffs, even when the sea became wild and frightening. Especially then. Tonight, however, would become different from all the others. Because this was the night a little girl named Mira arrived at Star Watch Lighthouse. Mira lived in the fishing village below the cliffs. She was curious about everything: shells, birds, clouds, stars, and stories hidden inside old books. But more than anything, Mira loved the lighthouse. Every evening she watched its warm golden beams sweep across the darkening sea. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Like a giant sleepy eye watching over the ocean. Her grandmother often told her, as long as the lighthouse shines, sailors will always find their way home. And Mira believed it completely. One chilly autumn evening, thick gray clouds rolled across the sky earlier than usual. The fishermen hurried back to shore, tying ropes tightly as the wind began to whistle. Mira stood at her bedroom window, watching the waves crash below the cliffs. Then she noticed something strange. The lighthouse beam had not appeared. No golden light crossed the sea. No comforting glow shone through the storm clouds. The lighthouse was dark. Mira's heart skipped nervously. "That's impossible," she whispered. Her grandmother looked up from her knitting chair by the fire. "What is it, dear?" "The lighthouse," Mira said softly. "It isn't shining." Her grandmother walked to the window. For the first time in many years, worry crossed her face. Oh my. Outside, the wind howled harder. The sea churned like black ink beneath the cliffs. Without the lighthouse, ships sailing nearby could lose their way among dangerous rocks hidden beneath the waves. Mira pulled on her warm coat immediately. "I'm going to help Elias." Her grandmother blinked in surprise. "In this way?" Rain danced wildly across the narrow cliff path as Mira climbed toward Star Watch Lighthouse. The wind tugged at her coat. The sea crashed below like giant drums. Boom. Crash. Boom. Far ahead, the lighthouse tower rose through the fog like a sleeping giant. Dark. Silent. Waiting. Mira finally reached the heavy wooden door and knocked quickly. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. Slowly, she pushed the door open. Creak. Warm air, carrying the scent of salt, old books, and lamp oil drifted toward her. "Mr. Elias?" she called. A weak voice answered from above. "Up here." Mira hurried inside and climbed the spiral staircase as fast as she could. At the top, she found Elias sitting beside the enormous lantern room. Blankets covered his shoulders, and his face looked pale. "Oh no," Mira gasped. "Are you sick?" "Just a fever," Elias said gently, attempting a smile. This old body finally decided to complain. Mira looked toward the great lantern. It was dark, cold, silent. "Why haven't you lit it?" Elias coughed softly. "The storm damaged part of the turning mechanism. I tried to fix it, but I became too weak." Mira looked out the rain-covered windows toward the sea. Tiny, distant lights flickered far away. Ships, still sailing in deep. "When I was young," Elias began softly, "I was not the lighthouse keeper." The storm rattled the windows as Mira listened closely. "I was a sailor." Mira's eyes widened. "A sailor?" Elias nodded slowly. "I traveled across many oceans. I saw floating icebergs taller than castles. I crossed waters so blue they looked like pieces of the sky itself." He smiled faintly at the memories. "But one terrible night, our ship was caught in the fiercest storm I had ever seen. Outside, thunder boomed, as if the sea remembered too. The waves were enormous," Elias continued. "Rain blinded us. The captain could no longer see the stars." His voice grew quieter. "And then we lost our way." Mira hugged her knees tightly. "What happened?" "Our ship drifted toward the cliffs beneath this very lighthouse." The wind screamed around the tower. "We would have crashed," Elias whispered. "Every sailor aboard would have been lost." He looked toward the dark lantern. "But then..." His tired eyes glowed warmly. A beam of golden light appeared through the storm. Mira looked up slowly. "The lighthouse?" "Yes." Elias smiled. "The keeper that night was an old woman named Clara. She kept the lantern shining despite the storm, despite the danger, despite being completely alone." The old keeper paused. "She saved us all." Mira imagined the brave lighthouse keeper standing against roaring winds while the sea tried to swallow everything. What happened to her? Years later, when I returned to thank her, she was very old. Elias looked at the floor thoughtfully. "She told me something I never forgot." "What did she say?" Elias's voice became soft as moonlight. "She said, 'For a moment, only the sound of rain filled the lantern room.'" Mira stared at the enormous glass lens towering above them. The lighthouse beam wasn't just light. It was hope, a promise. And somewhere beyond the storm, sailors were depending on it. Mira stood suddenly. "We won't let the promise fail." Elias blinked in surprise. "But the mechanism is damaged." "Then we'll fix it together." The old keeper chuckled weakly. You are very brave for such a small person. Mira smiled determinedly. My grandmother says brave people are usually scared. They just keep going anyway. Elias's tired eyes twinkled proudly. Well then, he said gently, let us begin. Together, they examined the lantern machinery. Rain tapped endlessly against the glass dome overhead, while gears clicked weakly inside the mechanism. Mira fetched tools, while Elias explained each part carefully. This gear turns the lens. That lever controls the shutters. Be careful with that spring. The lighthouse felt alive around them. Every bolt, every gear, every polished brass handle, all part of something larger, something important. After many minutes, Mira discovered the problem. A thick rope connected to the turning wheel had snapped during the storm. We need another rope, she exclaimed. Elias frowned thoughtfully. There should be spare line downstairs. I'll get it. Before Elias could protest, Mira raced down the spiral stairs. Wind moaned through the tower as she searched dusty shelves filled with maps, oil cans, and old sailor trunks. Finally, she spotted a coil of strong rope hanging beside the wall. She grabbed it quickly and hurried back upstairs. Together, they threaded the new rope carefully through the mechanism. Elias's hands trembled with weakness, but Mira steadied the tools for him. At last, the rope clicked into place. Elias slowly turned the crank. The gears grained. Then, whoa! The great lens began rotating once more. Mira gasped happily. It works! But Elias looked toward the unlit lantern. One more step. The flames still needed lighting. And outside, the storm was growing stronger. Lightning flashed across the sea. Thunder shook the tower. Elias carefully opened the lantern chamber, while Mira shielded the flame lighter from the wind sneaking through tiny cracks. Ready? Elias asked softly. Mira nodded. The old keeper struck the lighter. Click. Nothing. Again. Click. Still nothing. The wind hissed louder. Mira's stomach tightened nervously. Again, Elias tried. Click. A tiny spark appeared. Then another. At last, whoosh! Warm golden fire bloomed inside the lantern chamber. Instantly, the enormous crystal lens captured the light. Brilliant beams swept outward across the stormy sea. Whoosh! 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 The darkness outside suddenly seemed less frightening. Far away, tiny ship lights shifted course, safely away from the hidden rocks. Mira smiled with relief. We did it! Elias stared at the shining beam with watery eyes. Yes, he whispered. The promise continues. For a long moment, they simply watched the lighthouse glow across the restless ocean. Then, something unexpected happened. The storm began calming. Slowly, gently. The rain softened. The thunder faded farther away. Later that evening, Elias brewed warm cinnamon tea while Mira wrapped herself in a blanket beside the lantern room window. The sea below was calmer now, glittering beneath moonlight. You know, Elias said thoughtfully, Clara once told me storms reveal who we truly are. Mira sipped her tea. What did she mean? She meant calm days are easy. Elias smiled gently. But during storms, people discover whether they carry kindness, courage, and hope inside them. Mira looked shyly at her cup. I was very scared tonight. So was I, Elias admitted. She blinked in surprise. You were? Of course, Elias chuckled softly. Bravery does not mean feeling no fear. He looked toward the sweeping beam. It means protecting others, even while afraid. The lighthouse glowed warmly around them. Below the cliffs, the fishing village slept peacefully once more. And far out at sea, sailors followed the golden light safely home. Hours passed quietly. The storm had completely disappeared now. The ocean rolled softly beneath the stars. Mira yawned sleepily beside the window. Elias placed another blanket gently over her shoulders. You should rest. But what about the lighthouse? The old keeper smiled warmly. It will shine until morning. Mira watched the beam sweep endlessly across the water. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Steady, faithful, comforting. Mr. Elias? Yes, little star? Do you think Clara would be happy we kept the promise tonight? The old keeper looked upward at the stars glittering above the sea. Then he smiled softly. Yes. His voice carried warmth deeper than the lantern flame itself. I think she already knows. Mira's eyes slowly drifted closed. The last thing she heard was the peaceful turning of the lighthouse lens and the distant sound of waves brushing gently against the shore. Safe, calm, endless. And high above the sleeping ocean, Star Watch Lighthouse continued shining through the night, keeping its gentle promise to every soul searching for the way home. The end.